Hello, my name is Christopher, and I want to tell you the story of my life. Perhaps it will seem ordinary to you, but for me, it was a real kaleidoscope of events, emotions, and discoveries. I was born and raised in a small town in the northern part of New York State. My parents were ordinary hard workers. My father worked as a mechanic, and my mother was a teacher at the local school. My childhood was like that of most kids in our backwater: carefree play with friends on the streets, annual trips to the river, and watching regular teenage movies in the evenings. However, one fine day everything changed. I turned 15, and my life seemed to turn upside down. My mother complained more and more about feeling unwell. The rainbow world of my childhood quickly lost its colors. To make ends meet, I had to get a part-time job at the local fast food joint after school. There, I worked 8 hours a day, delivering trays of French fries and hamburgers to various visitors. Sometimes the work was simply exhausting, my legs ached, and the smell of stale oil penetrated my clothes. But I didn't complain because this money was very much needed by our family. In the evenings, I studied hard, trying not to fall behind in my study. My mom always emphasized the importance of education. Study well, son, and you'll have a chance to get out of our hole. However, combining work and study was getting harder and harder. Sometimes I literally fell asleep over my notebooks, and during breaks at school, I eagerly grabbed a couple of sandwiches, pretending not to be starving. And then there were my friends, Joe, Bucky, and the other guys from our group. Although we grew up in a tiny town, we were typical teenagers, fooling around, causing mischief, and laughing like crazy. Whenever I had a spare moment, I spent it with them. We chatted about everything under the sun, spent nights playing video games, or just wandered aimlessly through familiar streets. I remember one time Bucky brought a couple of cans of beer he swiped from his dad. "Well, Chris, shall we try this manly drink?" he smirked, and we rookies bravely took a sip of the manly beverage for the first time. I almost gagged from the bitter taste, but I held my ground in front of my friends. They laughed like crazy, watching my antics. That evening, I felt like a carefree teenager again, without serious worries or problems. At a young age, I began special training. Every morning started with grueling physical workouts aimed at developing endurance and strength. We ran through rough terrain, overcame obstacle courses, and practiced hand-to-hand combat skills. My father, a former astronaut himself, was a strict but fair mentor. After the physical exercises, we had classes on astronautics, studying spacecraft, and performing repair work in zero-gravity conditions. I immersed myself in complex calculations of orbital maneuvers, learned to recognize star systems, and understand the intricacies of life support systems aboard a spacecraft. However, despite all these preparations, our family never left the confines of Earth. Instead, we embarked on expeditions into its depths, exploring deep caves and underground labyrinths. These trips were a kind of training, immersing us in conditions similar to those in space. I remember when I first went on one of these expeditions at the age of 10. We descended deeper and deeper, squeezing through narrow passages and crossing underground lakes. Darkness surrounded us, and our flashlights were the only source of light. The air was stale and heavy, and the humidity seeped under our speleological gear, but even in these harsh conditions, I felt the excitement of an explorer. Every new chamber, every unexplored cave lured me with mysteries and secrets. I imagined myself as an astronaut, landing on an unknown planet and exploring its surface. Sometimes our expeditions were dangerous, and we encountered unexpected situations. Once, because of a landslide, we found ourselves cut off from the exit, and we had to wait for rescuers for several days. Another time, we encountered an aggressive swarm of bats, and we had to fend them off, risking serious injuries. But all these trials only hardened my character and strengthened my determination to one day become a real astronaut. I believed that sooner or later, the day would come when our family would travel to the stars, and I would be part of this historic event. Ahead of me were years of training and preparation, but I was ready for any challenges. After all, the blood of explorers flowed in my veins. And space beckoned me with its endless horizons. In addition to the space theme, which was an integral part of my upbringing, I always had an incredible passion for dinosaurs and paleontology. This fascination began in early childhood when friends gave me a book with illustrations of prehistoric reptiles. I remember spending hours examining pictures depicting huge predators like Tyrannosaurus rex and fierce reptiles that roamed the seas in those distant times. Their intimidating appearance and impressive size captivated me. I imagined how these giants once ruled the earth millions of years ago. Over time, my obsession with dinosaurs only grew. I collected all possible books, encyclopedias, and magazines dedicated to this topic. By the age of 10, I could name and describe dozens of species, specify the epochs of their existence, and tell about their habits and lifestyles. Friends perceived this as harmless childish enthusiasm, but for me, dinosaurs were much more than just toys or pictures. I dreamed of becoming a paleontologist, going on excavations, and personally uncovering the remains of ancient reptiles. There was a small exhibition of fossils in our town, and I spent hours there, studying the bones and impressions left by prehistoric Earth inhabitants. I was overwhelmed with excitement at the thought that these fragments belonged to living creatures that roamed the planet long before humans appeared. When it was time for my first serious paleontological expedition, anticipation overwhelmed me. Imagine my disappointment when I found out that the excavations would not take place in a hot desert, but in a swampy forest near the town. But even this could not dampen my enthusiasm. The atmosphere at the excavations was special. The work was carried out methodically and carefully, layer by layer. With endless patience and attention to the smallest details, every found fossil fragment was carefully documented and catalogued. Once during a shift, I was lucky enough to discover a well-preserved footprint of an ancient reptile. It was truly an exciting moment. The fossilized impression, left by the giant paw of a prehistoric creature, was the brightest evidence that many millions of years ago, incredible creatures roamed this very spot on Earth. After this find, all my thoughts were only about paleontology. Even the space training sometimes took a back seat. I immersed myself in the study of excavation methods, fossil restoration techniques, and the analysis of ancient ecosystems. My parents understood this with understanding. After all, they themselves were once young dreamers dreaming of space travel. My father only asked not to forget about family tradition, dedicating at least some time to preparation for future space missions. Thus, my days were filled with various activities. In the mornings, there were grueling physical workouts as part of astronaut training. After lunch, I delved into the study of astronautics and life support systems aboard a spacecraft, and in the evenings, I devoted myself to my favorite paleontology, studying books and making plans for future expeditions. I was very lucky that these two seemingly incompatible passions complemented each other. The skills acquired during space training helped in excavations, and knowledge in the field of paleontology expanded my horizons and taught me to think on a large scale, spanning huge periods of time. Deep down, I hoped that someday I would be able to combine these two paths. Perhaps in the future, there will be a chance to go to another planet where traces of ancient civilizations will be found, just as on Earth there are traces of bygone eras, and then my knowledge of paleontology and space training experience will prove invaluable. Despite my genuine passion for paleontology, in the Christopher family, the space theme always remained dominant. My parents and older relatives zealously guarded centuries-old traditions and tried their best to instill in me the idea that I should follow in their footsteps. From a very young age, the propaganda of space ideals was relentless. The walls of my room were adorned with posters depicting galaxies, nebulae, and interstellar ships. Bookshelves were bursting with science fiction literature and biographies of legendary astronauts. Even the cartoons I watched were invariably devoted to space adventures. My parents suppressed my interest in paleontology, calling it just a childish whim. My father sighed with poorly concealed disappointment when I brought home new books about dinosaurs instead of manuals on astronautics. And my mother endlessly insisted that there was not a single paleontologist in our family, but there were whole generations of brave space explorers. Grandma and Grandpa also contributed to this persuasion campaign. With tears in their eyes, they recalled the sacrifices they had to make for the sake of space exploration. They talked about long months of separation when loved ones went to orbital stations, about deprivations and the fear of losing communication that had to be overcome in pursuit of the dream. Astronauts in our family were heroes, legends worthy of the highest reverence. I felt pride in their achievements, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I could replicate their success. The thought of possible failure, shame for the family, made me hesitate. Friends didn't stand aside either. Instead of supporting my passion for paleontology, they only mocked it, insisting that with my lineage, I couldn't possibly become an astronaut. their sarcastic remarks wounded my pride, and I had to hide my true interests just to avoid humiliating jokes. Pressure came from everywhere: school, family, friends, all echoed the same sentiment about my predetermined path. Soon, I began to feel almost physical pain at the sight of paleontological exhibits or articles about dinosaurs. The envy was too strong, the guilt for spending time on something unrelated too great. Instead of fully immersing myself in the study of space science, a turning point came on my 15th birthday. It was at this age, according to family customs, that I had to determine my future and pledge to devote my life to conquering cosmic heights. For months, my parents urged me, reminding me of glorious traditions that I would forever tarnish if I refused. On my birthday, I gathered the whole family and older friends in our modest home. Amidst the numerous portraits of legendary astronauts, I solemnly pronounced the oath of allegiance. I pledged to work diligently, to learn the sciences necessary for space exploration, and to spare no effort to fulfill the dream, to be the first of the Christophers to set foot on the surface of another planet. On that day, I had to bury my passion for paleontology. Books about dinosaurs were relegated to the far corner of the attic, and the collection of fossils was distributed to young enthusiasts from the local museum. I felt an incredible emptiness inside, but I understood that I simply had no other choice. From that day on, my life was completely devoted to one goal: to become the greatest astronaut ever born into the Christopher family. Physical and technical training intensified significantly, consuming all my free time. In the breaks between exhausting exercises, I memorized formulas, studied the workings of rocket engines and life support systems on board spacecraft. At times, I nostalgically recalled the days when I could simply open a book and immerse myself in the world of ancient lizards, forgetting everything else. But then I dismissed those thoughts as intrusive temptations, capable of leading me astray from the true path. I had taken an oath, and I had to follow it to the end, whatever the cost. After that memorable day when I took the oath to follow in the footsteps of the Christopher family, my entire life was focused on mastering the space sciences. My parents did everything possible to prepare me for admission to the prestigious Galactic University, an elite institution of higher education that was extremely difficult to get into. Using ancient family connections, my father managed to arrange my enrollment, but even with this advantage, I had to literally grind through the granite of science, spending sleepless nights with books and simulators. The competition was simply overwhelming, as the best of the best from around the world aspired to this alma mater. On the day of departure for the student initiation ceremony, I felt completely lost. The huge futuristic campus with its many buildings, walkways, and experimental ranges resembled a whole city of the future. Thousands of young people roamed around, botanists, geniuses, oddballs with big glasses and tousled hair. They all thirsted for one thing: to grasp the secrets of the universe and become famous for discoveries of galactic proportions. The first few weeks simply overwhelmed me with their pressure. Professors' lectures were so deep and rich that it seemed the brain simply couldn't absorb it all. I stayed up late in the libraries, trying to understand quantum gravity theory and the principles of antimatter engines. My previous experience and knowledge in astronautics turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. Memorization took colossal strength and time, leaving no room for personal life. Besides, I had no inclination for romantic adventures. In the university, where everyone was obsessed with stars and scientific research, attempts to show romantic interest were met with ridicule and mockery. Girls usually looked at me as the embodiment of nerdiness and botany. My appearance, tousled hair, hunched back, perpetual pens, and a calculator behind my ear, hardly stirred up passion. For my tireless diligence and immersion in studies, local wits even dubbed me Astronerd. I can't say it bothered me in any way. Personal relationships were the last thing on my mind in those days. Thoughts were occupied only by unsolved problems, incomprehensible lectures, and upcoming training sessions in centrifuges and barochambers. The endless race for knowledge continued from day to day, from semester to semester. Many couldn't handle it and dropped out, unable to bear the overwhelming workload. Others couldn't cope with the strict discipline and drill to which our instructors constantly subjected us in their efforts to toughen up the character of future space conquerors. I, on the contrary, felt like a fish in water in this realm of strict order and endless learning. The tougher the trials became, the more stubbornly I clung to my dream, to someday go beyond the inhabited world, pave the way to distant planets and galaxies, only in rare moments of free time. Did memories return of what I used to be crazy about? Sometimes it seemed to me that there was no less romance in the lizard of the Jurassic period than in the discovery of an unknown nebula. How inspiring stories about the prehistoric world, its mysterious beauty, and dangers must be, but then I would banish these thoughts once again. My path had been chosen, ancient lizards were to remain in the past, ahead of me lay grander achievements, to break through gravitational limits to distant frontiers, beyond which yawned abysses so vast that everything explored so far paled in comparison. Years of study flew by in a blur. The time for final exams and dissertation defense was approaching. My entire life was focused on one single goal, to prove that I was worthy of becoming an astronaut, a successor to the fearless explorers of the Christopher lineage. After a series of insanely difficult final exams and defending my dissertation on the problems of creating highly efficient plasma engines for deep interstellar flights, the doors to the grand cosmos finally swung open before me. Thanks to brilliant results and family connections, I managed to pass the rigorous selection process at NASA and join the new batch of astronaut candidates. The first months passed in an exhausting cycle of training at specialized facilities. We spent entire days in barochambers, experiencing the effects of emergencies and depressurization, or in anechoic chambers, honing skills in sensory deprivation and noise interference. Instructors ruthlessly pushed us on centrifuges, pushing G-forces to critical levels. Physical toughening went hand in hand with acquiring specialized knowledge and skills. We learned to repair life support systems, perform extravehicular activities, drive transport modules on the lunar surface, and even dock spacecraft manually. Special simulators were used to practice maneuvers to overcome various emergencies, from collisions with space debris to malfunctioning propulsion systems. Sleeping only 4 to 5 hours a day, sacrificing personal life for the sake of achieving perfect form and maximum concentration. No obstacles or difficulties could break my spirit. I just couldn't dishonor my family, just had to prove that I was worthy of the honor to continue the martial traditions of the Christophers. And then, after 2 years of such hellish preparation, the great day came. I and 4 other lucky ones were admitted to the astronaut corps. By that time, only a handful remained alive out of the initial 100 applicants. All others couldn't withstand the inhuman pressures and were cruelly weeded out, in a solemn atmosphere, under the jubilant gazes of relatives and loved ones. We swore allegiance to the space cause. I proudly uttered the words, joining the ranks of the greatest explorers of the universe. In that moment, I almost physically felt the exultant souls of my ancestors looking down on me from above. However, it was clear that the trials were not over. Ahead of us lay a dozen years of intense work in the agency's training and research centers. We needed to obtain numerous additional clearances, master the piloting techniques of shuttles and state-of-the-art interplanetary ships. Then came the dockings with the International Space Station, the first brief forays beyond its confines, becoming progressively longer. Gradually, I learned not just to exist outside, but to freely navigate in open space, perform repair operations on the station's exterior. With each step, my confidence in my own abilities grew. I delved deeper into the mysteries of deep space, ventured further into the unknown abyss. And finally, it happened. My name was added to the schedule of the permanent crew of the ISS. Shortly before the launch, I called a family council. My father and mother listened attentively to every word, and I, gritting my teeth, announced that for me, there would be no greater honor than embarking on a space mission as the first of their children and grandchildren. The long years of study and training culminate today in the realization of a centuries-old dream. Answering the call of blood, I am ready to join the ranks of explorers driven by an insatiable thirst for adventure. These words clearly touched my parents to the depths of their souls. Tears of pride for their son welled up in their eyes as he honorably continued the traditions of the Christopher family. Hugs and congratulations poured over me in those moments. The whole world belonged to us that day, and just a couple of weeks later, amidst the roar of mighty engines, I soared towards the stars aboard the Discovery shuttle. The greatest chapter of my life was unfolding, the conquest of Earth's orbital space and the conduct of long-term scientific work there. And just a couple of weeks later, amidst the roar of mighty engines, I soared towards the stars aboard the Discovery shuttle. the greatest chapter of my life was unfolding, the conquest of Earth's orbital space and the conduct of long-term scientific work there. My first days on the ISS were a true revelation. I was in a constant state of awe, watching our dazzling blue Earth glide by in the windows. The space station became a new home for me, and its crew became a second family, together with comrades Jack Riley, Anna Petrovskaya, and Kenichi Tanaka. We conducted scientific experiments, monitored the station systems, and occasionally ventured into open space for maintenance work. In the limited free time we had, every section of the station turned into observation points. Each of us sought to capture a new perspective, revealing the breathtaking vistas of our vast planet and the boundless cosmos beyond its borders. Like tiny deities floating in weightlessness, we gazed down as landscapes changed below, from lush green forests and fields to sun-scorched deserts and gigantic icy wastelands. The spectacle was truly mesmerizing. It seemed as though the entire world lay at our feet, shimmering with bluish pearlescent waters of oceans, green threads of rivers, and sparkling lights of cities drowning in the bluish twilight of night. The tiny station separated us from lifeless expanses. And in those moments, the fragility of our existence was keenly felt. One day, I was on duty in one of the modules when a dreadful, room-shaking roar erupted. I was literally thrown aside by the shockwave accompanying the sound. Alarm signals went off, and Jack, who happened to be closest to the incident site, and I rushed first to the computer compartment to assess the state of the life support system. The sensor readings were alarming. There had been a breach in one of the habitation modules at the lower part of the station. Oxygen reserves were rapidly leaving the habitation sections through the breach in the hull, dissipating into the airless void. The dangerous situation threatened to turn into a real catastrophe. If the leak couldn't be localized in the shortest time, we would suffocate from lack of air. Anna and Kenichi were closest to the breach, and after a few minutes, their voices ceased in the dynamics of the intercom. Then, an ominous silence set in, broken only by the roar of air rushing into the vacuum and the automatic warnings of the onboard computer. The situation hung on the brink between life and death. All systems responded to the leak, closing one bulkhead after another, but sealing the entire breach proved elusive. Jack and I had to urgently don vacuum suits and embark on a perilous search for the damage. The situation was simply nightmarish. The entire lower section was deserted, its gaping wounds oozing the last remnants of precious atmospheric air. We progressed literally by touch, as most windows had fogged up from temperature differentials, and shards of twisted metal hull created external barriers. Securing safety lines was difficult, risking with each step to end up in the open vacuum following the rush of escaping oxygen. Finally, we reached the epicenter of the damage and feverishly set about patching the breach with makeshift material and special plates from the repair kit. Time seemed to stretch into eternity, but we succeeded. For a moment, the vital air ceased to escape from the habitation sections. After stabilizing the catastrophic situation, we managed to return to safe decks and assist Anna and Kenichi, who had been thrown to the farthest ends of the station by the shockwave. Fortunately, our comrade suffered nothing fatal, apart from severe fright and bruises. Truly, such a terrifying incident made us realize how fragile the boundary between life and death is in orbit. Even a slight deviation from normal functioning can ruin an entire expedition in an instant. It was a grim reminder of the high price humanity pays for conquering the cosmic frontiers.